Hi, we are Kate Hall and Marina Barcelo. Marina is the Student Inclusion Coordinator at PSU's School of Social Work, and I am the MSW Student Inclusion Intern. Today, we'll be talking about accessible classroom configurations in the School of Social Work. Our outline for today looks like this. We'll be discussing defining classroom accessibility. Why is this presentation happening? Disability justice, DRC furniture, table and chair configurations, accessibility as social justice, and moving forward. Accessibility in the classroom refers to a lot of different things, including physical space, course materials, class activities, communication and instruction, and sensory accessibility. But we don't have time to cover all of these today, though we may in future presentations. The point is, classroom furniture configurations are just one small part of the big picture. Even if there is an accessible furniture configuration, other aspects of the classroom may still be inaccessible and also need addressing.
Why is this presentation happening? Our classrooms here at the School of Social Work are very malleable, and that is a beautiful thing. We have movable furniture, no chairs attached to desks, and no chairs with armrests in the classrooms. But that malleability becomes a barrier when it isn't utilized thoughtfully. While it's great that the furniture can move, it becomes an issue when it is moved in front of a door, into a corner, out of the room, and in other ways that block access. Again, why is this presentation happening? The DRC has gotten numerous complaints about inaccessible classrooms in the School of Social Work, and they have done so much work to try to make it more accessible. Thank you so much to Josh Goodson, who has been the person handling the majority of these complaints. Last spring, the Disability Resource Center was here almost every week to meet with Josh to discuss these complaints. This presentation is happening to provide the School of Social Work with more information about why accessible classroom configurations are important, to remind us all why we should care about this, and to provide some suggestions to help implement and maintain accessible classroom configurations. We are going to talk about accessibility as a social justice issue, the role of the DRC furniture in each classroom, table configurations, and next steps.
Disability justice is social justice. Disabled people throughout history and still today are consistently left out of social justice movements, even in the most radical and progressive spaces. This happens through inaccessible meeting locations, for example, not considering the accessibility of a protest route, the prioritization of direct action versus behind-the-scenes work, not including disabled voices and perspectives, especially voices and perspectives of queer disabled people of color, invisibilizing disability as an intersection of oppression, ignoring the role of ableism in police brutality against Black people in the U.S., mass incarceration and criminalization, intimate partner violence and domestic violence, homelessness, and many more. Disability is very often a huge factor in these issues, yet ableism is much less often named as an intersecting axis of oppression. The truth is that disability is disproportionately represented in every single marginalized group. But disability is also traditionally understood from a very specific lens: white, wealthy, and otherwise privileged. This skews our ideas about what disability looks like and how disability is talked about, or more commonly not talked about, in social change spaces. How would social justice spaces change if we talked more about, for example, how over half of the people killed by law enforcement in the U.S. have been disabled and deaf people, and that this group of people is also comprised disproportionately of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, low or no income, and trans people? This is one reason why a distinction between disability rights and disability justice is so important, and we'll talk more about this in a later slide. The point is, inaccessibility is one way that disabled people are excluded from social justice spaces. DRC Furniture. The DRC Furniture is assigned to specific classrooms for specific students who have classes in those rooms. There is one specific spot the DRC furniture is supposed to stay in each classroom. It's supposed to stay not just in a specific classroom, but in a specific spot in that classroom. But people don't know this, or they don't read the sign, and they'll move it not just around the classroom, but to other classrooms. This is a problem especially in 620 and 630, since it opens up into one big room. The DRC furniture, more often than not, just gets shoved into a corner. When someone enters a room to find that their accessible furniture has been moved around, they have to waste time and energy looking for it and moving it, and if you're disabled, that's not a reasonable expectation. Sometimes other people who the furniture isn't assigned to will use it, which can result in some really awkward confrontations. It's usually an accident, but what message does this send to the people who need the furniture? That they aren't welcome? That they don't belong here? That a lack of consideration means that their learning, education, and experience is not prioritized as highly as others in the space, and that the onus of accessibility will always be on them, when in reality it's a collective responsibility. So what can you do? At the beginning of the term, explain the DRC furniture to your class. Make sure people know what its purpose is and why it's important that it stays in the same spot. If there's a student who needs the furniture in your class, don't single them out, but explain the furniture's purpose more generally. You can also talk to your class about accessibility as a collective, not individual responsibility. Next, we're going to talk about the non-DRC furniture in the room, the tables and chairs.
Table and chair configurations. In the School of Social Work, we have freestanding tables and chairs, which is wonderful. We also know that people feel very strongly about different configurations for different activities, discussions, small groups, paired exercises, etc. But not all of those layouts meet baseline accessibility standards because of the small size of our classrooms. For example, a semicircle does not work. The classrooms here are too small for this layout to be accessible. There will always be a chair in front of the door. There is no one ideal layout, but there are a lot of inaccessible layouts. In order for a configuration to be accessible, it has to meet certain standards. Baseline access standards. These standards are on the DRC website and emphasize aisles and wide spaces. These are helpful for mobility device users, people with chronic pain or illness, people with movement disorders, people with anxiety, and many others. There must be a center aisle from the back of the room to the front. This aisle should be at least 40 inches wide. The space between rows of desks should be at least 36 inches wide. DRC tables need to have a 60 by 60 inch space behind them in order for a student who uses a wheelchair or scooter to be able to pull up to the table, back away, and turn around. An easy way to make sure that the DRC table is accessible is to place it so that there is a direct path from the doorway to the table, and space behind for the person to maneuver as needed. If you need to move desks into groups, keep the 36-inch distance and 40-inch aisle in mind, and return the furniture to these positions at the end of class. So some really important questions to consider. Can all people easily enter and exit the room? Can all people easily maneuver around the room? Something also to note. If a person has to ask other people to move out of the way, it is not accessible. This is one way people excuse inaccessibility, and it's important to be clear that having to ask for accessibility is a barrier in itself.
The blueprint shown here was designed by the DRC for room 650. It has a wide center aisle from the back of the room to the front, space between the rows of desks that's at least 3 feet, a 60 by 60 space behind each of the DRC desks, and a path to maneuver from the doorway to the DRC desks. In an ideal world, the furniture would stay in this exact position forever. It wouldn't move, so no one would have to worry about whether their DRC furniture is in the right place or not, and no one would be responsible for moving the furniture back to an accessible layout because it would already be there. But we also know that most people in the School of Social Work are not a fan of a rows layout. A lot of classes involve small group work, small group discussions, and pair work, and a rows configuration isn't the best for that. We know that if we try to enforce a rows configuration, there will be challenges. People will still move the furniture and likely won't put it back. So, then the question becomes, how can we make it so that people don't have to do any furniture moving at all? And how can we make it as easy as possible for people, if they do move the furniture, to put it back for the next class?
We are presenting an accessible pod configuration created by one of our BSW and MSW graduates, Renee Rice. Thank you so much, Renee. This is a configuration that they put together to meet all the standards. Our hope is that the tables and chairs will stay in this configuration day to day, and that the only people who change this configuration are the same people who will be able to put it back after they're done. To make it easier, we'd like to propose outlining the shape of the pods in colored tape, so it's easy to see exactly where they need to go. We'd like to hang a graphic of the configuration on the wall to help people remember what it looks like. Again, we acknowledge that the furniture is very heavy and it's not easy to move. We recognize that faculty members are often under time constraints between classes or meetings, so they shouldn't have to worry about whether or not they'll have to move furniture before and after a class. Ideally, if we have one accessible configuration, we would never need to move the furniture. Our problems would be solved. Right now, we are only focusing on classroom configuration, but eventually we would like to talk more about creating accessible event space. So for example, when we hold events in the joint 620-630 space.
We'd also like to acknowledge that these blueprints only factor in 30 non-DRC seats and 2 DRC seats. We know there are classes with more students than that, so we want to make it clear that this is just a starting point and that we have more work to do around this.
This is a draft, and this is not a final version of the pod configuration.
I'd like to return now to a conversation about accessibility and social justice. So often, accessibility is viewed as an obligation or a matter of logistics, meeting legal standards so we don't get in trouble, covering our asses, etc. And unfortunately, a lot of the vocabulary around accessibility and in the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, supports this perspective. For example, the word compliance, such as an ADA compliant building. The language of reasonable accommodations versus unreasonable accommodations. Who gets to decide what's reasonable? Not the disabled people who actually need them. The same people who decide what is reasonable also determine which accessibility measures would cause a quote-unquote undue hardship for the people providing accommodations due to cost, size, time, energy, etc. This means that the bare minimum becomes the standard. Through all of this, we have been trained to see accessibility as an inconvenience, an extra thing that we have to add on, rather than something incorporated from the get-go. Accessibility that is only focused on meeting the legal standards outlined in the ADA is not enough. As we all know, just because something is illegal doesn't mean that it won't still happen, or that people genuinely care about the issue and are committed to social change. The ADA is obviously helpful, but if we're only meeting accessibility standards because we legally have to, that informs our beliefs about disabled people, how they should be treated, and what they deserve. And we start to view accessibility as one single set of rules. This is where the differences between the disability rights movement and the disability justice movement become clear. Disability rights focuses more on legal protections for disabled people and is connected with the initial passing of the ADA in 1990 and discusses disability as a single isolated issue. In comparison, disability justice was developed in 2005 by queer disabled people of color as a response to the very white and individualistic disability rights movement. It positions disability as an intersection and views accessibility as a collective responsibility rather than a matter of litigation. So holding on to that, what if we viewed accessibility as a liberatory tool, a tool for justice, for creating and maintaining space for people who have been historically excluded from higher education? Thinking this way also forces us to move beyond physical accessibility and talk about sensory accessibility and communication accessibility. It asks us to dream beyond the ADA and view accessibility as a never-ending process of creating and expanding. It asks us also to acknowledge the inherent value of disabled people and their contributions to social justice movements.
Liberatory access. We strongly encourage you to think about accessibility not as an obligation, but as a tool for liberation. In her piece, Access, Intimacy, Interdependence, and Disability Justice, Mia Mingus shares, liberatory access calls upon us to create different values for accessibility than we have historically had. It demands that the responsibility for access shifts from being an individual responsibility to a collective responsibility. I believe we can do access in liberatory ways that aren't just about inclusion, diversity, and equality, but are rather in service of justice, liberation, and interdependence. Moving forward, at the beginning of term, please explain the purpose of the DRC Furniture and its importance, and explain accessible table configurations. We also encourage all of us to question our assumptions. Question the assumptions that we make about the merits or drawbacks of certain configurations. If you feel like a particular inaccessible configuration, like a semicircle, for example, is the only way or the best way people can learn, why? If this feels like an inconvenience to you, why? At the faculty meeting, we agreed to place the tape on the carpet, outlining the accessible classroom configuration in each of our classrooms. We ask that if you do move the furniture for your class, to please return it by the end of class to the original outline.
If you have any questions, concerns, or just want to talk more about this, you can contact either one of us, and we'll be happy to meet with you and answer any questions you may have. Thank you for watching this presentation and for your support in making the School of Social Work more accessible.
Thank you.